Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 80. In this one, we're going to talk about ISO 45001 and the performance evaluation aspect of this. Let's just dive right in. So, for those joining us, a very quick overview. ISO 45001 is a international standard that sets a effective occupational health and safety management system framework based off of the Plan Do Check Act, much like ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, although the scope is occupational health and safety as opposed to quality or environmental. So, Section 9, Performance Evaluation. This is where we're going to sit down and say, well, how do we monitor and measure our performance here? So, um, like all things, we can put a plan in place, but we have to look at the effectiveness of that plan after. And then, of course, we adjust as we go. Quite possibly, we underestimated our abilities and we've completed the plan early. Other times, we've set very ambitious goals and not really worked towards these goals in a good fashion, and thus now we've fallen short. But the big thing, of course, is that we're monitoring and measuring performance that's out there. So as part of it, we're going to look at a evaluation of compliance, not just with the standard, but there's a legal aspect in here too. Then, so I would always say that before you ever do any form of a standard, do everything you can to say, I believe I am truly following um, the legalness, let's just call it if that's even a word, of OSHA and EPA and all those guys first, and then try and get fancy and say, well, now let's look at the management system that's out there. So as part of it, there's also a internal audit aspect of it too. We just can't say, hey, we put the system in place, we'll circle back in a year, we'll look at how things went. We're going to do audits along the way to say, how did we do on this? And of course, at times we're auditing things like the hazards, and at other times we're auditing things like roles, responsibilities, resources, training, all that good stuff. So, and you always have to have a management review of this then too. So that's where we're going to sit down and actually say, this is exactly what we found as part of the system. This is where some people have a hard time speaking truth to power out there. And if the system that's put in place is not operating effectively, we have to do everything we can to bring it up to management's attention as quick as possible and have them course correct or have them say we have not given resources, and you kind of almost surge the resources to different areas to get yourself back on track then for this. So this is a long-term project, of course. Anybody who thinks they're going to do ISO 45001 in a week or two and then come on back and check in a month, it's going to take longer, because the big thing that we're trying to do is to have a system in place so that we tackle and assess the hazards, we control the hazards out there, we do all that stuff, as opposed to running from fire to fire and not really having a good handle on the accidents, injuries, chemical spills, all that stuff that we have out in the workplace. Part of it, of course, is that after you've had an incident, we're going to look at the incident investigation process. We're going to do everything we can not to have the same one. So we're not just going to have a accident and then at the end say, well, I told the person to be more careful. There, the accident's now been investigated. We've now taken control of this. We're going to go ahead and tackle this. So the system looks at accidents and injuries and all that as a non-conformity, and part of it, of course, is that you have to take corrective action. Corrective action means that you're going to solve for root cause, not just solve for. I've seen this at many companies where, regardless of what happens, they're doing everything they can to blame the person and say that they use bad judgment, they know better, they've been with the company for a while. The whole litany of excuses out there. And then we want to look at continual improvement. how are we getting better out there? So a lot of times when we set up a system, we have to just say these are the hazards that we have in place. I've kind of inherited this site, this system, this is how I'm going to make things better out there then. So part of continual improvement can also be, so now that we've taken care of the baseline of the issues, how do we go back and make sure that we don't have these issues again? How do we go back and before we buy a piece of equipment, we're going to read about this piece of equipment. We're going to do everything we can to watch it run in action. We're going to have any hazards fixed by the vendor before they get to our place. Because once that we get it here, regardless of what our really good intentions are, almost everybody wants to put it in, put it to work because the company has spent time, effort, and money on this thing. It's time for it to pay for itself then. So it's always harder to have something fixed after it's at your facility as opposed to the vendor is doing it for you before it even ships from their location. That is it for episode 80. We just did a very quick overview of performance evaluation. I wish I could go into greater detail, but this is also based off of the goals and objectives that people put in place. So there's not going to be a 100% set. This is exactly right and this is exactly wrong. With all these systems, it has to be what works for you and your company and your management system in place and all those other factors that you just can't say that everybody will have these factors and that's going to be it moving forward. That is it for episode 80, ISO 45001. We talked about the performance evaluation aspect. My name is Dr. David Ayers. Thank you for joining me today and have a safe day.